all of the wealthiest people that I know made their money in some way, shape, or form through real estate. Billionaires who I'm friends with, and they made their money through real estate. Some did it through commercial, many did it through multifamily residential.
Welcome back to the Mark Ferris Experience. I'm your host, Mark Ferris. Today we are talking with Brennan Kaler. Brennan is the CEO. He's the leader of Kaler Law Firm. He runs it with his amazing wife, Christine. They are just phenomenal people, but just brilliant business minds. And they currently have 23 team members. They've settled more than $500 million in cases. So he's one of the best that I've ever seen in negotiating. And we have a real treat for you on learning some of the key lessons that help Brennan take something from nothing and grow it into one of the largest firms in the entire country. Brennan, thanks for the call.
Well, thank you for the very kind introduction, Mark.
Yeah. Well, I've been looking forward to this because there's that, I said, you're one of the best negotiators I've seen and communicators. And, your background, you weren't, born into, the success world. Your backstory is something that I think is really inspiring it was inspiring for me when I first heard it, but I know for the listeners, if you could give a little bit of your backstory on, coming from a challenging kind of little bit of an upbringing, right? And then, what made you go into getting into business for yourself? And maybe you could share kind of the origin story of Brennan.
For sure. So, humble beginnings. My parents, were not educated, and quite frankly, weren't particularly motivated. So I didn't grow up with much of an example of sort of how to lead. I was just at lunch with a friend, and he was relating. We were talking about our kids, as we often do, and we were, sort of comparing notes on who was doing what and how they were doing. And my friend remarked, he said, our kids have such a good example. And I am not one to toot my own horn whatsoever, but the reality is that our kids have grown up seeing people with strong work ethics who are ambitious, going out and being achieving and accomplishing the tasks that they wanted to accomplish. That's not something I grew up with, and so it's sort of this thing where I learned everything in the reverse. And so basically, I learned that if I wanted to have an outcome that was different than the one that I was raised in, I would have to do everything directly opposite to what I grew up with. And so I grew up, very, to say working class. I think that's probably too kind. Ended up going to the University of Western Ontario, where I did a 4-year degree in political science. Got a really solid education there. Ended up going to Osgoode Hall to complete my legal studies. Went on. I knew that I had an interest in making things right. And, what I practice is plaintiff personal injury law. But the larger classification of the type of law that I'm involved in is called tort law. And the idea, that's Latin term for twisted. And the goal in a tort claim is to make things right, to correct things that are wrong. And that was always my inspiration. And so I ended up working for one of the premier practitioners in Canada, learned everything that I could, and then ultimately made the decision to start our own law firm. And that was about 18 years ago.
There was an email writing course that you said, I remember we were having a chat in the past, and you said, hey, like out of all the schooling that I went to, I took this one course on writing emails. Can you share that and how that's helped you?
Totally. It was transformational. So I was in my 4th year of studies. It was the first term of my 4th year. I actually, I was not a great student for the first 3 years of my university education. I really, really messed around. I spent way too much time in bars. I actually had a full-time job while I was in undergraduate, just to sort of help make ends meet. But I had, and I'll just share this with you because this was transformational for me. At the end of 3rd year, I was going to go into my 4th honor year in political science. And I remember I had a meeting with a guidance counselor, and it was the first time that I had ever sat down with someone at school and actually looked at what are my grades, what are my plans. No one had ever talked to me about that. It had always just been going to class, or in my case, oftentimes not going to class. I remember sitting down, and this university administrator, looked at me judgmentally, as she should have, and she said, "Brennan, why are you going back to fourth year?" And I said to her, "Well, I'm going to go to law school." And she chuckled, and she looked at my grades, and she looked at me point blank and said, "Not with those grades." And so for the first time, I was confronted with reality, and it was an awakening for me. I immediately pulled up my socks, and I started actually treating my education like a job, and I became a student. And part of that transformation involved taking an English writing class. So it was English writing 101. And I can remember the class to this day. I mean, what was it, like 25 or 30 years ago? I was taught for the first time how to write. And in order to write, you have to think clearly. And so by learning how to write, I actually learned how to think clearly. And this one course really helped me to change my course and help me to think clearly, help me to write well. I think I ended up being one of the top 10 students in social science that year with a grade average, a GPA of 93. And so it really helped me turn things around, helped me during my law school for sure. Writing is so crucial, and being able to organize your thoughts is so crucial. And so I've told my kids, my daughter now is a freshman at the University of Miami, and I've told her, if you go to university, and if only things you take away from university are that you learn how to think logically, and you learn how to critically think, and you learn how to write well, that will have been worth all the time and all the money, because that is ultimately what I took away from my fourth year. And Mark, I tell you, like to this day, I still rely upon those skills and that experience.
Okay. So you took this email course, and I just thought that was such a simple, practical course. So if somebody wanted to do that, because I've thought about that in the past, I'm like, man, I should take that course now, right? For, writing emails and stuff, because we do it all the time. But, in business, it's just like you continue on, and it's like, oh, I don't need to take a course. I know how to write emails. But that, because I've corresponded with you in the past, in that correspondence, I'm like, oh, the emails are so perfectly aligned. Like everything is looking. So if somebody wanted to take an email course like that now, like where would you recommend that they go? I guess you could just look it up online, or is there any direction there?
What I would say is, I can't fault my teachers. I can't fault my schools for not teaching me how to write. I have no doubt that was offered, and that was, part of the curriculum, and that if I had been engaged and interested, that I would have learned how to write. But, I would encourage anybody, and I don't know that they teach writing that way anymore, at least in elementary schools. And, I've seen what my kids were taught. I have three kids, ages 15, 16, and 18. And, they went to a good school, and I don't know that they received sort of the black and white rules of grammar and how to organize your thoughts. I would encourage someone who feels as though they're not communicating in the way that they want to, and that their written communication is as effective as they want to look online for simply a basic, like again, English 101 grammar course that will teach you the basics. And it's by learning the basics that you learn how to organize your thoughts. And so that would be I have no doubt that it would be very simple to find an online course
Yeah.
that would be able to teach those basic skills that I don't think the kids are learning nowadays.
I totally agree. And I tell our boys, our oldest is 16. And, for me, it's like, when you go to school, like basic math is important. And then being able to communicate is important
Mhm.
as well. But being able to learn,
Yeah.
like critically think, you said, you
Yes.
gave that as the example, like learn how to learn. That's like the key, because it's an ongoing thing that you got to life never ends it doesn't end with the end of university. And that's where I think a lot of people, they go to university, it's like they'll never read a book again, instead of they never take another course, or, never try and learn anything other than kind of what they're kind of the one thing. And I think if you can continue to develop and grow over a whole lifespan, you're done maybe at 25 or even 30, if it goes that long, like you potentially, if you live to 100, that's 70 years of potential growth. Like you're going to get ahead, right?
Absolutely. And I think, being able to critically think is like, you can't overestimate the importance of that. I mean, I think we have regrettably a large portion of the population that doesn't want to think critically. And so they never take the effort to learn how to do that. Rather, they simply accept what they're told, whether it's being told that by their real estate agent or their family physician or the news. And, we have stressed with our kids the importance of challenging what you're being told and figuring out a way to cross reference it so that you ultimately can walk away feeling as though you're satisfied that that you understand the thing.
Is there a framework you follow, Brennan, when it comes down to uh, critically thinking or even making decisions that helps you make, quality decisions? Is there any sort of like framework or questions that you tend to ask? And I'll maybe set this up. I was sitting with this other business guy, and he said one of the best tips that he had from his mentor was that whenever you get an A or B option, he said, don't look at it as A or B. Look at just they're different, which doesn't mean, which then opens up the possibility for you to think about a third or fourth or fifth option that just aren't being presented.
Yep.
So I guess going, kind of framing that up like that, that's kind of one approach. Or do you have an approach that you follow when decisions or when it comes down to critically thinking?
So, this is, I'm just going to tell you practically what I do. So, you mentioned my amazing wife, and yes, I have an amazing wife, and I'm very, very grateful every day for Christine, who's a lawyer who practices with our firm and helps to manage our firm. But we have different gifts, and so I am very much the big picture person, and so I'm able to conceive of things at a high level. But where I'm not good is with little details, and I don't like fussy details. They frustrate me, and so Christine and I are a great team, and we're a great team because we complement each other in that we have skills that complement each other. So Christine knows that whenever it comes to making a big decision, I will rarely pull the trigger without having a conversation with her about it, because she's going to bring a different perspective to things. And I think maybe one of my strengths is that I appreciate that I don't know every damn thing. I can remember, it goes back to an examination for discovery I had once with a very senior lawyer, and he reminded me of that fact, that I don't go every damn thing, and he was absolutely correct. And so that awareness helps me avoid making big mistakes, because I'm very, very willing to incorporate other people's perspectives on things. And so whether it's Christine, or whether it ends up being my associate lawyers, or whether it ends up being my senior clerks or other colleagues, I invite other people's perspectives, because I'm not so beholden to having to be right. I'm okay with being wrong. As I say to Christine, she knows this. I'm happy for somebody to be a backseat driver. I just don't want to be in an accident. And so I never get bothered at all by somebody criticizing me or observing something and bringing it to my attention. That's what I'm looking for. So I guess the answer is, I want to feel as though I have the whole picture. So for example, I like to golf, and I'm not good at it. You know that. And so let's say I hit a ball, and let's say I hook it and it ends up in the woods. When I go and look for that ball, I am going to take the widest route possible. I'm going to eliminate any possibility that I'm not looking at every place where it could possibly be. But I also don't get bogged down. And that's one of the things I think that is an advantage I've seen with a number of young lawyers that I've employed over the years, that in their fear of making a mistake, they end up paralyzing themselves. And as a result, they end up being unproductive. So it ends up being a happy medium. And I think, having done this work now for 25 years and knowing myself at this stage of life, there's a balance between being confident that you've explored all possible perspectives, but also being decisive.
And that is extremely attractive in a leader, that one would have a mindset of an openness to hearing others' opinions and understanding that you don't know everything. And It is really a super. I agree with you. I mean, that is a superpower because then that means that your cup is not full. Like somebody that just knows everything, they just can't. They can't accept any new any new input. So they just, their cup is full. You can't fill them up anymore, which gives it actually limits their growth. Whereas if your cup is always just getting bigger, but it's never quite full, then it actually allows you to develop more as a leader. That's really good insight. And also the other point there about getting people around you, like in this case, Christine and Joanna, for me, is the same thing. Like she has real strong strengths as well.
Yep.
But even if your spouse maybe is, complementary and or maybe just say your skill sets are the same, then surround yourself with team members that help you become kind of that perfect person because all your weaknesses, they bring those strengths, and making sure you surround yourself.
100%. Yep. Yep. And I can say our team at the law firm are very much like that. I would not tell you that I have half a dozen lawyers who are identical to me. They bring different things to the table, and I think that's why as a team we're effective.
I think that there also needs to be you need to be confident in yourself to say that you're wrong, or maybe your idea wasn't best, right? And I think that's where, like, I'm constantly telling my team members, and it takes at the beginning for, like, we have some real A players that we've brought on our team, and I found that in their past employment they got reamed out for bringing an opinion. And so I found with many of them, I need to like reaffirm them anytime they subtly give an opinion. I'm like, that's good. Like, okay, you know what? I was off on that. You like, I think you're right. And like, you got to like build these A players up sometimes, because in their past, they've been around like, kind of abrupt CEOs that are kind of like bullies, and everybody, they got to be right all the time. Right. So,
And I've experienced that. And, I've seen I've worked with people who cannot be wrong, and it's a fascinating personality trait that I've seen in certain people, where I'll refer to them as the Teflon Don. Nothing sticks to them, and they will engage in like unbelievable mental gymnastics to try and explain away their mistake. When, quite frankly, as I like to say to my staff every day, I make mistakes all day long. And the question is, can you learn from them, and can you try to minimize the damage that they cause? But I'm very happy to admit that I've made a mistake. And I find that my team members who end up being most successful in the long run are also people who can admit to making mistakes. The people who can't admit to making mistakes, they've never succeeded. Not from my experience.
That is just such wise counsel. If you really grasp that, I found that, I mean, Brennan, I mean, that's a perfect example. His top people are people that can admit some failure along the way and take ownership of that. Because what that does is it allows them to be curious. And if you talk to most top producers, they're curious, and they're asking questions on an ongoing basis, gathering data, right? And that's a really good one. And it's more rare, I've found.
Again, as you say, though, I think it takes a degree, and we'll use the word confidence, and there may be other words that would more perfectly capture that personality trait. But having the self-assuredness to say to yourself, I made a mistake, and that's okay. It isn't tied. The fact that I made a mistake doesn't mean that I'm a failure. It means that I made a mistake, and I'm going to work at not making the same mistake twice. And maybe I will, but again, I'm going to continuously work at doing better. And it's acknowledging that we're all human. We're all we all have our failings, every single one of us. And it's acknowledging that, which is to say, acknowledging reality, because to live in a world where you think that you're perfect, or you have to feel as though you're perfect, is not reality.
Yeah, no, 100%. Are there any misconceptions or say myths about your industry? Like, what would you say for the listeners out there that maybe is a misconception or a myth?
Yeah. One of the myths, of course, of the ambulance chasing lawyer is, that they're only looking for the quick buck. And I have to, say, in my experience in 25 years, Certainly, there are certainly a significant percentage of lawyers who practice plaintiff personal injury law only for the money, and they're in it for the money because the reality is that plaintiff personal injury law generates revenue that is unlike any other area of law. These personal injury firms are run much more like businesses than law firms, and there are large firms, and they typically tend to be the larger firms that pour a ton of money into advertising who are looking for one-offs. And so their approach in business is it's a one-off model. And so they are volume firms. They will bring you in. They will settle your case very quickly. They will persuade you that your case is not valuable. And because you're not a lawyer and you've not been in this situation before, you will likely believe them. And those firms do a great disservice to the lawyers, the many, many lawyers who don't take that approach. And, we end up taking over files from those types of firms frequently, the sort of firms that you would know the name, even if you weren't involved in the industry. We take files over from them all the time simply because, every once in a while, a client will appreciate that they're not being taken care of. And so our approach is there's a minority of lawyers in my business that take the approach that we take, and that is that we are client focused. We're in it for the long haul. We prepare every case for trial. We invest a lot of money and a lot of effort and time. And, when I started the firm off 18 years ago, I started it off with 10 cases. I had 10 files, no staff members. I had to learn how to operate a fax machine because that was relevant back then. And I answered the phone. And my wife cut checks for vendors while she was nursing our firstborn from our living room couch. And what I said to myself was, I'm going to overservice every one of my clients. And at some point during the life of the file, my client is going to see that I'm going to put their interests ahead of my own. And very often what that means is when we're in a settlement negotiation, the defendants may put an offer on the table that my client wants to take. But I appreciate that if I were to do a couple of more things on our checklist, and it would take another 6 months or so, that I could put an additional sum in my client's pocket. And so I oftentimes have conversations with them where I'm telling them, no, we can't accept this. And, they'll appreciate that I'm doing that because it's in their best interests. And that is what creates loyalty in my experience. And so it's one of the reasons why we don't advertise. I don't spend $1 on advertising, and I haven't for more than a decade. We depend on client loyalty, and all of our cases come to us on referral.
Yeah, that's so great. And, it is more rare to find that. And, people, especially coming into an industry, if they're not in it every day, like, the inner workings, and they want to be led. They don't want, well, what do you think? It's like, here's what I would here, based on my experience on this, and this, this is what I think we should do. And it's like very clear, and people, they want to be led. They want to be led by an expert that they can trust. So I think that approach is, like, I could see your advocacy. I mean, I've talked with about clients in the past, and it's incredible, but I think it's that client first mindset. You got to start with that. Like,
you take the same approach. I know that. I know that you took that same approach when you started your business off. But I think, you've just highlighted an important point. And again, it's more of a comment about people at large. There are people that want to be led. And that sort of dovetails with our conversation about critical thinking. There's some people who either are incapable or do not desire to engage in that process of actually looking at things and questioning whether something is actually in their best interest. And it's the people that don't do that who sadly get taken advantage of by lawyers who don't have the client's interest first and foremost. And, we see it all the time, Mark, where we take on files, and fortunately, if we take them on, we can salvage them. But of course, many, many people are being taken advantage of. And in our case, there isn't a do-over. You get one shot. Once that case is settled, it's done. You, of course, theoretically can bring a claim for solicitor's negligence if your lawyer were to do something that was, not in your interest. But those cases are very, very difficult to prove, and the threshold is high, and the ability to establish the evidence that would be necessary for that is really, really challenging. So it
Yeah.
almost never happens.
Got it. No, that's really, really great insight. Now, going back to when you started, you had mentioned you were doing everything, fax machine and whatnot, to what you're doing now. Like I'd say from, all my friends and business relationships, you're probably one of the best that I've seen on being able to have, say, a life and doing that really well with your family and then also being very intentional in the business. And so how has your role changed from, you basically just you and Christine to now you're overseeing 23 people? And what is it that you're working on today that is like delivering the majority of your results? Like, how's that maybe, has it shifted at all from when you started till now?
Oh, it's changed significantly in certain respects, and of course, in other respects, it really hasn't changed. And so, what happened with over servicing these clients? So basically, I took in clients. When you start off in this industry, you're going to take on the smaller files. You're not getting the big files. I would take small files and I would work on them as though they were big files, and that created a referral network. And so ultimately what ended up happening was I was bringing in too much work. I had more work than I could handle, which ultimately led me to make the decision that I wanted to bring more lawyers on. And so I started hiring lawyers, and certainly some have come, some have left. I have, some that have stayed with me a long time who are very, very successful. And so in one sense, the business has changed because I'm not the guy that answers the phone. And I'm not the guy who, in fact, quite frankly, I don't even meet really with new clients anymore. My associates do that for me. My job, I become engaged with the file once we are retained and once I've determined that a file that I should be working on a file, because I like to limit the number of files that I work on. I want to know who my client is. If I bump into them in the mall, I want to know who they are. I don't want to have the embarrassment of not knowing who they are and not knowing what the status of their file is. So on the one hand, the business has changed because it's expanded and I have a lot more people involved, and those people do a lot of the things that I used to do. But on the other hand, one thing that hasn't changed is with the files that I work on, I continue to lead them. And so one of the strategies that I employed that I learned from my first law job was that in order to stay on top of a file, it's important to have regularly scheduled meetings focused only on that file. And so we call them team meetings, and we have team meetings on each file, generally between 6 and 8 weeks apart. And we'll meet on a number of files, but for that period of time, I'm only focused on my one file, and I will have my team with me. We will review our progress. We'll identify any issues that have come about. But I've found that, again, doing this for 18 years for myself now, things don't fall through the cracks because we hold these team meetings. And that's something that's really the engine of our firm. And I try to ensure that my junior associate lawyers do the same thing with their files and their staff, because that has allowed me to push my files forward in an aggressive way that I think most of, and I know this because they've told me, many people in my industry will say that we end up with files ready for trial sooner than the majority. And I think the team meetings are a part of that because they keep us organized and keep us moving forward. Things that, we're not reliant upon a squeaky wheel client to do stuff. We're the ones who are being proactive.
Driving it forward. That is such a great point on if you want to drive any point of your business forward, having the regular scheduled meetings, I think is genius. There's a good book called The Ultimate Sales Machine by, I believe it's Chet Holmes. And he talked about, like, for every department, have a regular meeting schedule in regards to, say, a deal file, like what Brennan, like what you're saying, Brennan, that makes a lot of sense as well. So if you want to improve any part of your business, having like preset meetings of focus, because whatever you focus on like grows and whatever you track gets improved, right? And so I think that's so great because you get so busy in business just doing, but like actually moving something forward, if you pre-schedule it, it means that you're gonna be able to move it forward instead of just like, okay, let's work on this, but you never allocate time or get around to it.
I agree. And so so as I told you, I'm a big picture person. I am the last person that would be accused of being a micromanager. And it's just because personally, and I guess it's a weakness of mine, I'm not good with fussy details. They frustrate me, they drive me crazy. And so one of the things that team meetings does is it provides a venue for accountability, because people are being called upon to demonstrate their progress over the course of the last 6 to 8 weeks on their tasks and a file. And it's one of the ways also that I can identify problems in the making. So if I have, and the reality is we're all human. We all have issues. I can see when someone is confronting a personal crisis through these team meetings. And I, at some point, had a staff member come up to me and let me know recently that they were dealing with a personal, serious health issue. And it totally fit, because I confronted this person over the course of the last while with the fact that their effort had changed. And I was grateful that they came to me to at least acknowledge what was the cause of this underperformance, and we can work with that. I need to know if there's a problem. I always tell my clients, I can only fix a problem when I know that it exists. And having these regularly scheduled team meetings, having people stand up and deliver and explain what they've done and what they haven't done, that's a big part of that.
It's so powerful. And, for us, what changed the game in our business is when we started actually taking that to the extreme and actually doing like daily huddles, and then having every person in our companies, they have a weekly same page meeting with their leader. And then we have quarterly meetings. And so like you could take it to the extreme, and that you had said something really smart. It's built-in accountability that they need to report and come prepared in those meetings. So, there's a good book, Death by Meeting by Patrick Lencioni. Is like, you might be listening to this and saying, "Oh, I hate meetings." And it's like, well, there's ways to run meetings to be able to ensure accountability and communications taken to the next level.
Totally. I mean, in any sort of, and I use the word bureaucracy simply to mean a large group, not necessarily governmental, but just in any sort of a bureaucracy, there is the risk of engaging in meetings almost in an effort to not do things. And I think it's a matter of finding a balance. And as I'm sure you are, one of my strengths is efficiency. And I hate inefficiency, and I'm really, really big on that, because I think it's a huge driver. Well, I know it's a huge driver of productivity. And so for me, these meetings are quick, man. We're not messing around. That's not the time when I want to find out about your dog and it's not doing well and all that stuff. We're here to deal with the client's file, solve those problems, book the next team meeting. We do it right at the old one, and then move on to the next file.
Is there a certain outline that you follow? Like, are there like a few things you're like, okay, guys, when we go into this meeting, we're going to go, is there like a generic kind of outline that the listeners could follow?
Yeah, and we used to use an actual paper, like a form, a template, which would track each of the stages of litigation. And so that's what drives it. What drives it is the timeline. And, my belief in terms of best practices is that there should be a pretty routinized schedule of events that need to take place in order to get a case to settlement. And, not to become too specific about the work that I do in my industry, but, my experience in 25 years is that insurance companies will only pay the right amount of money for a file when their feet are put to the flame. And that's the only time. And in my business, feet to the flame means that all of the steps to develop the file have taken place. A pretrial hearing has taken place where a judge has finally thrown the bucket of ice water on the drunk man and woken up the insurance company who's been pretending that the case doesn't have value, tells them what it's worth, and then schedules a trial date. And so unfortunately, and it's certainly it's a feature of injustice in our system, and probably most judicial systems are the same, people don't get what they're entitled to until right before trial. And that's when the insurance company all of a sudden wakes up out of their slumber, and I start getting phone calls and I start getting emails. We have a trial sitting starting in Ontario in January. And right before you and I jumped on this call, I had a flurry of emails from defense counsel who really, really want to talk to me and say that's unfortunately that's how it works.
Well, and this is where having somebody that is a master in their role, you have like the secret ingredients there to make a great result. And because you've done this so many times, you know the steps and then how to do it to maximize the result. And it's the same, for selling houses or we're going into a real estate investment. We know where the levers are and we have like set its process to follow where we know we're going to get a certain result, whereas others are maybe winging it.
And so that really hits home for me. One, you're right. I do have the ingredients. I do have the ingredients. I know what they are, and I've been around and done it enough times that you're not really going to surprise me. I've pretty much seen most of it, and so no doubt there'll be something. But most times, I can harken back to a previous bile experience, and I know how to deal with something. But it comes down to mentorship. And so, when I ended up leaving my former employer, we did not leave on good terms. We left on bad terms. But what I've always been clear to everybody about in my industry is I got outstanding mentorship. I was taught from the best how to do it in the best way possible. Now, certainly, having left and done my own thing, I've added tweaks to that. But I was taught the formula and I cared enough. I was conscientious enough to actually want to do that with my own client files. And it ends up lending itself to a general idea. And it's one that I've shared with my kids. I'm never going to work for anybody again. I'm always only going to work for myself. And I know that with certainty. And that's not to say that working for somebody is a bad thing. It's not. I needed to work for somebody to learn my craft. And what I see in my industry, and no doubt this applies everywhere, is that we have so many young people who are not receiving that mentorship, who then go off and decide to do their own thing. And it ends up either being a disaster for them or being a disaster for their clients because they don't know the right things to do. And as I mentioned, my daughter is a freshman at the University of Miami at its business school. And one of the pieces of advice that I've shared with her and I've shared with my boys as well is, ultimately, you probably are going to want to do your own thing. And my recommendation is after school, figure out what you think you're interested in. Find the person that is the best in the industry at doing the thing that you think you want to do and go and work for them for a minimum of 5 years. And it doesn't matter how much you get paid. We have lawyers. I remember back when I graduated law school, the main driver for all law students was salary. What mattered was you would go to the firm that would offer you the highest salary. I certainly did not do that. And it wasn't out of choice. It was just out of circumstances. And so I found the person that was best at what I did. I didn't necessarily know it at that time, but it ended up being the way. And I worked for half of what my buddies were working down on Bay Street, which is the Canadian equivalent of Wall Street. And, ultimately I massively overtook them in earnings, but it was because I worked for somebody for 5+ years, learning everything. And when I figured out that I was at a point where I could do it on my own, I took that step. And I've encouraged my kids to do it. I encourage everybody to do it. I think that's a real recipe for success.
Well, that's genius. And I think the genius there, I mean, you can look at, there's entrepreneurship and then there's entrepreneurship. So you can have that owner's mindset and grow within the company. And that might just be that deliver all the results that you're looking for. And then, if that next step, you want to take that step out, that's where I think what Brandon was sharing is really smart, but you got to learn first.
Yes.
That's, I think, the key principle here. It's like, you got to, instead of just going and kind of figuring out on your own, there's that principles that if you just learn them, and that's actually Napoleon Hill in his book, Think and Grow Rich. He encouraged his son to go work for one of his friends that he knew was like really solid at like way less salary. And, because it's what you're going to learn, that's going to pay off dividends down the road, learning like that at the beginning.
And, so that is critical. Another thing that I've noticed, and it's it's the reason why I'm encouraging my kids. I mean, they're young. They haven't had their first jobs yet. I mean, other than babysitting or doing pressure washing and cutting lawns. But one of the things that I've noticed is that I do have dear friends, who've fallen into what I would call a tender trap. And the tender trap is one that I could have easily fallen into. And that's where, you are a professional, you're an executive, you can use whatever term you want. You are working within a large organization, and no doubt you're well paid. I mean, you're living a comfortable lifestyle, but you end up becoming comfortable enough that you are not willing to take the chance to try something on your own. And I have a number of friends that I have zero doubt would have been hugely successful had they opted at the right time to make the jump and start their own businesses, but they were too comfortable in their executive position that they stayed. And I know that they're missing something. I know that they're missing something in terms of who they are and what they've accomplished. And they'll often tell me that. They'll tell me that they're dissatisfied with aspects of their work life because they made the decision to not go and try their own things. So that's also something that I've noticed. And that's, again, you learn these lessons, you want to share them with the people that matter to you. And so that's one of the things that I've told my kids is you've got to watch out for that.
Yeah. No, really great insights there. What stresses you out, Brennan? I mean, you're a pretty laid back, easygoing guy, but is there anything in business where it's like this kind of like stress? I'm kind of getting stressed here.
I have to tell you, I really don't stress about things much anymore. Certainly, earlier on in my career, doing a great job, making sure that my employer was happy with me, making sure that my clients were happy with me. I can recall, back when I first started the firm, I would get a new file. And, in my business, if a client's not satisfied, they may leave you, and they can leave you. And essentially, you don't end up getting paid for the work that you've done. And so you've sunk all that time and you basically wasted that time. There was a period of time when my practice was young where there were some really, really, unscrupulous business people who would literally poach clients. And so they would identify clients through various means that had claims, and they would somehow persuade those people to leave their firm, even if they were satisfied with the firm. Sometimes it was offering money. Other times it was just lies. And I remember that there was a time when there was one such person who targeted my business and ended up pulling a couple of my client files. And I remember feeling stressed about that. But ultimately, I brought a lawsuit against that person. That lawsuit settled. That person desisted what they were doing. And since then, we've just not had any issues with that. Other than that, one of the thoughts I had was, I was speaking with someone about this the other day. In my business, cash flow is the issue because, and I remember you and I spoke about this years ago, and you were shocked when I told you, our time from retainer to settlement and actually seeing any money is generally 3, 4, 5 years. So for 3, 4, or 5 years, I will work essentially for free. I will not ask my client for $1, either for our efforts or for the money that we invest in a file to build it up to get doctor's reports. My average file, I probably invest $100,000 of my own money into third-party reports. And so that's how we build up the medical and the losses of the case. And so, with that, being said, it's cash flow matters because you're paying for your staff and you're having living expenses and you're paying for those disbursements on those files. And so in my business, cash flow matters. There were some times when, cash flow would be lean. Every once in a while, things that I stress about are generally things that are outside of my control. And that's, fortunately, I don't lose sleep over it. I sleep like a baby. But there are times when cash is lean, and oftentimes that's imposed by the court. The court will change the way it does things such that it moves trial lists such that you thought you were counting on 10 files settling in September, and now all of a sudden they moved it, and now it's in January. And one of the things I've been shocked by is the attitude of the banks. And so it doesn't cause me stress, but I know that it causes my wife stress because she's the one who manages the firm's finances. And I was recounting to a friend of mine, we've been with a certain bank for 25 years, and we've had our mortgages with them, and we've done business with them, for 18 plus years now as our own firm. And I can remember, when those situations come up where there's a blip, there's a change. And, we'll go to our bank and say, listen, can we get a little bit of a bulge in our line of credit? And the pushback we get is just astounding in light of the fact that I've never not repaid every penny that I borrowed from them with interest. They've made millions of dollars off of us, and yet there's still that reluctance. And that can be a stress from time to time. As I said, I think it's a stress for Christine. I fortunately find a way to sort of insulate myself from that. But that would be one, and it boggles my mind.
Yeah, no, I can totally relate with that. And it, through the years, you have huge payroll going through, you have a huge revenue, and then you have like the ultimate track record of never missing a payment. It's interesting. So that brings, I know we've talked about this before, like how many months of cash would you recommend a business hold, uh, to be able to be, to insulate, I'd say you need a line of credit. I mean, especially when you're starting off a business, I mean, there's cash flow constraints, obviously, but as soon as you start making money, which is going to be my next question after this on investing, but should there be a goal of how many months of cash for maybe expenses that a business should keep on, or is it just kind of like as much as possible?
I think it's going to be entirely dependent on your business cycle. So whereas in selling residential real estate, perhaps the business cycle from retainer to sale is 30 days or 60 days or 90 days or 120 days. In my business, because it's so long, I wanted to have more rather than less cash on hand. So what we did, all I can explain is our own personal circumstances. When I left the firm that I worked at, my wife was on maternity leave. She was not working. We had a mortgage, we had car payments, we had all that stuff, and a new baby. And so, I basically said to myself, I know how long these files are going to take to settle. I want to have a bulge that allows me to pay my own expenses for a year. But that's because I was starting a plain personal injury firm. It would be very different for somebody who's starting a business where, right out the gates, they're going to see some cash flow. I think it was, I can recall very well the first case that I settled. And it was a referral from a family friend. And I would say that was probably 9 months in. So we had been incurring expenses. We had an office. I was driving from Barrie, Ontario to Toronto every single day to be in my office by myself, but to try to get some work done. And it took until the 9-month mark for us to bring a file in. And, then things started opening up, but it took a while.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you burn the ships there, which is a really great principle as well. Burn the ships and you're going to be successful because you have to be.
100%. 100%. We were invited to speak at a symposium that was put on by our bank many, many years ago. And I remember, they didn't run questions by us. So we were shooting from the hip, and we were, Christine and I were seated there with the spotlight on us. And I remember one of the bankers asked me, if you could give a new entrepreneur a tip on being successful. And I don't know that the bankers appreciated it, but my answer was, make sure you're in a position where failure is not an option. Failure is not an option. The ship is burned, man. That was it.
Great advice. Great counsel. Will Smith, he said his mindset is, if you get on a treadmill with him and you're in a competition, he said one of two things are going to happen. Number one, you're either getting off the treadmill first, or I'm going to die trying to beat you. Right. Yep. Like when you're competing against a guy like that, that's tough guy to compete against. Right. Yeah. Yep. So it's just that kind of mindset that I know, Brennan, you have. And I think with a lot of successful entrepreneurs, they got to face a lot of rejection, and, that mindset just gives you an unfair advantage.
The other advantage, and of course, it's with the fullness of time that you can appreciate sometimes the things that you thought were hardships actually end up being assets. And one of my assets was, there was nobody to turn back to. There was no family member who was going to bail me out if I didn't succeed. It was all on me. And so, I tell my associates now who see that I live a very comfortable lifestyle, and I would tell you that most days I do what I want to do. So I'm as involved as I want to be. But as I tell them, like, they weren't there on day one when I was waking up, in February in ice cold at 5:00 in the morning, getting myself shaven and put together so I could fight traffic down to Toronto for an examination for discovery, which is a deposition in the States. And I was doing it every day with a new client who I'd never met before, and I just had to get them prepped. So it was those were the days, that paved the way to ultimately being able to do the things you want to do.
Built up your resiliency. No, that's so good. Great story there. So, okay. So now let's just say the entrepreneurs started to make money. They're starting to do well. They have their cash reserves there. There's so many things entrepreneurs can invest in today. I mean, for us on a real estate investment firm, I mean, we have to say no to like 200 apartment opportunities that come. So it's like we see opportunity everywhere. And then the one golden nugget, when we finally find it, it's like then at that point, because of that discipline, we're able to, double investors' money in 5 years. And so with all that being said, for our listeners, what kind of advice would you help them sift through kind of the sea of options out there to help them decide where they should invest their money as they start, investing, and to be able to get, good returns and safe as well?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess there are two answers to that question. One would be where would you invest your money? And another one would be, where do you invest your time? And I think, I've never spoken about this, but I think from a purely money investment perspective, I think I'm firmly of the opinion that due to the use of leverage and due to the tax laws that exist both in Canada, but even more so in the States, I've preached to my kids and to all my friends that care to listen. I think real estate is the answer. All of the wealthiest people that I know made their money in some way, shape, or form through real estate, and I'm talking about billionaires who I'm friends with, and they made their money through real estate. Some did it through commercial, many did it through multifamily residential. But it's really the place where you can invest some of your money. You can leverage lots of the bank's money. You can generate cash flow. You can do so typically without even having to pay income tax because of the tax laws relating to depreciation and the ability to borrow off of equity. So I just think it's a no-brainer. I think that anybody who has money, who's interested in investing long-term, not short-term, day traders, I'm talking about a long-term push towards developing wealth. I think real estate is absolutely the way to go. Again, that's where I'm encouraging my kids to think. I'm having them think in that space. I've probably mentioned that to you before. And that's where I see, my family in terms of our investing. Our investing is largely in real estate. I have friends. I have a friend who is fabulously successful businessman and capital venturist. He made his money in private equity, and so that's another option. But for me, I like to see something. I want to see something. I want to be able to hold it. I want to be able to touch it and know that it has intrinsic value. No doubt there will be lots of folks who listen to your shows, your podcasts, who will be enthusiastic about the cryptocurrency. I personally, and this is, with my kids are oftentimes encouraging me to invest in it because I think they're watching things on TikTok. They're suggesting that, of course, it's the get rich quick scheme, which I know I'm not a fan of. I don't believe in that. But, I can't understand. I have friends who are invested in crypto. I can't understand the intrinsic value in it. And so I don't have $1 invested in it. And great for those people who got in early and who are looking at big fat returns. Congratulations. I'm happy for you. I just don't see it. Whereas with real estate, I think it's abundantly clear that the laws and the way that it works makes it the safest investment and also probably the surest way to developing long-term wealth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. And I think if for the listeners, if you're listening to this, I mean, Brennan was saying most, if not, most of them, his successful friends, it was real estate. And, it's well known. It's like 90% of millionaires use real estate. So I would just encourage you to your most successful people, ask them, how did they make their money? And it's success leaves clues. And the government wants you to use real estate. They don't want to be landlords. They tried at one point and it didn't work for them. And so they incentivize it and all the rest of that. So I think that's really good insight. Brennan, we could talk all day, I'm sure, about business and success principles and whatnot, but I want to honor your time here. So you ready for the rapid fire part?
Sure.
of the conversation. All
Yeah,
right.
let's do it.
So, all right. Which book, if you were to pick any book that has, helped you the most through the years, is there a book that stands out
Yeah.
that you'd recommend for listeners?
Totally, and it makes me think of you because the author's name is Timothy Ferriss,
Mm,
and the book was the 4 Hour Work Week. I admittedly, I'm not a big reader. I'm not a big reader. I really don't get into books. I've read a couple recently, but I'm not a huge reader. But I read that book, and it was the easiest read. It was a pleasurable read. It's a short book. I'm sure that most of your listeners will know and probably have read it. The reason it's important is that it helped to inspire me to my current lifestyle. And the theme of the book is that most of us are needlessly inefficient in our approach to work. And Timothy Ferriss takes the position that most people could succeed in a business even if they only worked 4 hours of very, very targeted and focused work. Now, I don't only work 4 hours a week. If I wanted to, I guess I could, but I like to be more involved in things than that. But what the book taught me through its examples of Timothy's own experience of actually doing this and simplifying his life, I realized that I didn't need to be in the office 40 hours a week in order to be successful.
That's such a great story that a lot of us tell ourselves that I got to be there 40 hours a week. But the reality is if you work twice as hard and do it in 20 hours, that makes sense, right? It's about productivity versus hours. So that's really good insight. Okay. So 3 words. If somebody was to describe you with 3 different words, what would those 3 words be?
Well, of course, it's all going to depend on which group of people you ask.
I know you best.
Right?
Okay. Yeah.
I think that they'll say that I'm fair-minded, and I think it goes back to what we were talking about before. I know I don't know everything, and I like to take a fair and equitable approach to things. I realize that there are almost always two sides to a story. I think working in law frames that perfectly. Every case, every issue has a different perspective. It just depends upon how you're looking at it. So I think my staff would tell you that I'm fair with them. I'm even handled. I really believe my kids would tell you that as well. And so I think that I'm a fair person. I think another thing that people would tell you is that I'm honest. I'm trustworthy. And so to me, it's, I really believe that if I tell somebody that I'm going to do something, I need to follow through with that. I have a compulsion to have to do what I say. I think, that's probably in part due to the fact that, when I was growing up, I didn't get that experience. I had things promised to me that never happened. And so for me, it's very, very important to be a man of my word. I've been called a mensch by some of my Jewish friends, and I take it that it means sort of to be a good all-around guy that you can sort of trust. And so I take that as a great, great compliment. If I were to think of one more word, I think people will tell you that I'm productive. And so I remember when I was an associate lawyer at my only other job that I've held other than having my own firm. The other associates would say that I got done more by lunchtime than they got done all day long. And the reality is, and again, not to toot my own horn, just comment on something that was objective. When I left my former employer, I was responsible for more of his files than his other 3 associates combined. And I brought in more revenue than they did. And so I guess I'm not a FaceTime guy. I'm not going to be the guy. I never worked long hours. I would, show up at 9:30 or so, and I'd be out of the office by 5:30 or 6. I would have colleagues that would stay into the night. And one of the things I learned about myself was that I'm full throttle. I just go in, I'm going to tear things up. I'm going to go really aggressive into something. But then I hit a point where I'm out, I'm done. And what I learned was I will be 10 times more productive if I packed up my bag, went home, went to the gym, had dinner, went to sleep, woke up in the morning, came back, And I would finish what might have taken me 3 more hours that evening. I'll finish it in half an hour. So I learned that.
That's so powerful. And bang on. And that's proven now to be true across the board. So fair, honest, and productive for sure. And that's been my experience definitely of you. So I think you nailed that. And just to wrap up, what is there any final kind of quick advice that you would give the listeners out there? Any final advice that you'd say, hey, just by the way, this is kind of the last point in order for you to be successful, try this.
Yeah. If you're somebody who decides that you want to have a partner for life, and by that I mean a spouse, that will be the most important decision that you make. Everything else is going to flow from that. Everything is going to flow from that. And so, I was thinking to myself, if I were to give myself, my younger self, a piece of advice, I would have gone to myself and I would have said, go and find Christine Wright in Regina, Saskatchewan, marry her sooner, because that's the only regret that I really have, is that Christine and I met later in life, and so we have 3 kids, and I tell you, if we met in our 20s, we'd have 5 or 6. And so I would just say, prioritize. If you decide that you're somebody who wants to get married, prioritize selecting the absolute best person. Don't settle, because your happiness, your success in business, your relationship with your kids is all going to flow from that one decision.
Oh, wow. That is such a strong piece of advice to finish up on. And it's so accurate, so bang on. Brennan, great job. It was just really great nuggets here for, I know, the listeners, and, I got a lot from it as well. So if anybody that's listening, they know somebody that needs an amazing personal injury lawyer, what's the best way that they can reach out to you? And
anybody can email me directly at B Kahler, which is spelled Kahler, at KahlerLawFirm.com. And if we aren't able to help you for jurisdictional reasons, I'd be happy to put you in touch with somebody who will take a client-centered approach to your file.
So great. Well, thanks again, Brennan, for coming on the show.
Great seeing you.
Yeah, you too. And thanks for listening, guys. If you like the show, please share and subscribe to the channel, where we're building a community of up-and-coming entrepreneurs here. And just remember, the fastest way to build wealth is to grow your business and invest in real estate. I love you guys.